Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Bragalone. I'm here with Brent Segner. We are from Capital One, here to talk to you about integrating open source tools to advance your FinOps pipeline.
So last year, our VP was here. I think she gave a similar talk. At the time, she started to be able to talk about how we at Capital One have used a number of open source tools just to be able to look for anomalies, cost optimization opportunities. So this year, we're actually going to flip the script a little bit. The context is a little bit more towards how we've started to be able to leverage open source standards to be able to get deeper insights and allow us to be able to move a little bit further up the stack. If you could go to the next one. Okay. So if I ask most people, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Capital One? It's the Samuel L. Jackson jumping out of a plane, Jennifer Garner doing something super interesting, what's in your wallet. So all of those things for us, basically, I don't know whether it's a catchy slogan or just really, really great spokespeople, but over the last 20-some years, Capital One's had a tremendous amount of success in the financial industry. We'll go next one really fast. Okay, so the thing that we're a little bit less known for, well, maybe in certain circles, is going to be more of our cloud journey. So it was 2016 that our CEO, Rich Fairbanks, basically declared we're all in on the public cloud. Up to that time, we'd had a private cloud, but it didn't get us the flexibility or the ability to be able to deliver on some of the promises we're making to our customers. So you can see just prior to that, we actually launched our open source program. So as soon as we started to be able to go all in on the public cloud, that now gave us the flexibility to be able to really start to be able to invest in open source as an accelerant for us to be able to go through and hit our targets for our all in on a cloud journey. Over the course of the next 3 years after that, we continue to be able to invest in all things open source. Now we're getting to the point where we've not quit that investment, but we're starting to be able to diversify. And Mike's going to talk here soon about how FOCUS is allowing us to be able to do that. Go next one.
So, like Brent mentioned, in 2015 is when we began our Capital One open source program. From the minute we launched it, Capital One has really been focused on, number one, increasing our open source footprint in projects that are close to us, but also expanding that footprint to a lot of different areas of opportunity. Specifically, Capital One has released more than 25 open source projects. They span across a multitude of domains, whether it is data, cyber, even things related to FinOps and things like that. We've been able to really have a large impact in our open source contributions, and we're getting a lot of benefit from those open source contributions because we're able to start, number one, integrating with the right people. That means coming to events like this, integrating with FinOps, integrating with the FinOps Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. We've been able to kind of expand those partnerships, expand our networks, but also really enable a lot of those projects to continue moving forward. Funny enough, at this exact same time slot, there's another talk going on by someone at Capital One talking about inner sourcing, which is the concept of how you can open source at your own company. You all chose to be here, which I'm glad. Hopefully nobody gets up and goes to that one. But would definitely recommend looking at the slides, right? Because our open source program is really focused on, number one, doing these things externally, but also treating our own internal projects like open source and being able to inner source across teams, inner source across domains to help us enable this sustainability and enable us to continue reaping the benefits of open source. Like Brent mentioned, last year, FOCUS was the focus. So last year, part of the keynote was Ann Johnston, who's our vice president, talking through what FOCUS is, how we had started thinking about FOCUS, and kind of where it was going. The amazing thing is that at that point, FOCUS was still in its preview phase. Now FOCUS is actually GA. FOCUS is a project that was started by the FinOps Foundation. It is really an open source spec for cost and usage data. What that means is that every cloud provider has their own fun way of kind of reporting your cloud usage data. Even someone as small as potentially just like a SaaS product could be very different reporting from a cloud provider, could be very different reporting from even an internal tool. FOCUS really aims to help solidify that and create commonality. That way, you don't have to duplicate efforts. right? I like the last line of it here, that it enables businesses to refocus energy on strategic activities. If you have to build the same pipeline 9 different times, you're losing that value probably around that, 2nd to 8th time. Maybe you gain a little at the end, right? But the idea is that it helps you understand how you can consolidate those pieces and really get the value out of the cloud that you want, which is looking at your data, not just ingesting your data. So the FOCUS project started a couple years back, and on the steering committee has actually been, number one, Ann Johnson, our vice president, but also a provider from each of the major clouds, right? So by having that, enablement from the cloud providers, it meant that the second you want to use FOCUS, it's become really available, right? At FinOps X 2024, not that long ago in July, right, we saw announcements from all major cloud providers basically launching their FOCUS support and launching their FOCUS capabilities. What this means is that if you use AWS, you can now use their FOCUS data exports. GCP has very similar functionality, same with Azure, same with Oracle Cloud, right? We've seen large adoption of FOCUS, but that also means that we're seeing a large footprint of usage of FOCUS, right? And one of the really cool things that comes with that is that the FOCUS spec has continued evolving, the use case library has continued evolving, right? The amazing piece is not just ingesting commonly, but it's being able to have a use case library of pre-built queries. Within FOCUS, there's a list of 70+ queries where you can basically get for free data insights. One of the really cool data insights you can get is cross-cloud insights, because you now can look at your builds together. You can also get cross-service, cross-domain. You get a lot of these pieces for free, and it makes it easy for your FinOps practice to grow and scale as you grow and scale within the cloud. One of the really cool, easy use cases that we found at Capital One for this was unit metrics. So being a company that really focuses on compute and getting the value out of our compute, we really wanted to understand where we can get that best bang for your buck, right? Being primarily on a single cloud, we want to understand within that cloud, are there better places we can get compute? We also want to understand that potentially if we look at multi-cloud, maybe we want to understand how we can get those different prices of compute across the cloud providers and compare things apples to apples instead of looking at the different naming conventions that each cloud provider has. What we're able to do is use a pre-built FOCUS query that allows us to actually pull the effective cost of compute. We can run this same query across any one of our cloud providers, and we can then have an easy example that says cloud provider A costs $1 per hour of compute. Cloud provider B might cost $2 per hour of compute. It makes it really easy business decisions that can enable us to do the technology things that we want to do. Similarly, we can even look within our own singular cloud at this, where if we want to understand who is using their compute the best, we can look at individual applications and see that application A is getting $1 value out of their compute, whereas application B might be getting $10 or more out of their compute. What we begin to see is that we can now compare within ourselves how we're doing. It gives us the ability to almost understand who is spending the most efficiently and who could potentially use better spending habits, check what's in their wallet a little bit better, and understand what they can do differently to potentially match up to that team that's doing really well. Outside of this, we really start to begin seeing the benefits of open source within our own cloud, but we realize that there's still a lot of opportunity outside of just the cloud provider bill, because that bill only tells us our usage in one dimension, and it only tells us our costs. Next, Brent will talk through OTEL and kind of how we looked at it from an observability standpoint.
Yep. So when I was looking at the schedule for the conference today, I noticed there are a ton, like probably 3 or 4 different great talks on OTEL. So I'm not going to talk about all things OTEL today, but maybe keep the focus on a little bit more how we use OTEL data within the context of both from a FinOps cost optimization perspective as well as from maybe a performance efficiency perspective. So for any company that's been in the cloud for a long time, you start to be able to get a relative state of maturity. Specifically like in the public cloud, you've now done all of the easy stuff. So okay, so my S3 buckets, I've turned on lifecycle policies. My EC2 instances, I've been able to go through and ingest all the telemetry data to be able to make sure I'm on the right instance family type, the right instance family size. So you've done all of the easy optimizations. In order for you to be able to continue to be able to optimize, you need to move up the software stack. So you're now getting out of that infrastructure layer, and you're starting to be able to move up actually into, we'll say, like the OS or the code layer. In order to be able to do that, though, you need a lot of data, a lot of retail, like really, really detailed data, and you need to be able to do analytics on it at scale. When we were looking at trying to be able to do this through conventional vendors, it gets to be cost prohibitive. As I'm sure everybody here has experienced, It's free to go in, it's really expensive to be able to come out. So as we start to be able to talk about the volume and type of data that we wanted to be able to get back, it wasn't feasible via the traditional route. OTEL gave us the ability to be able to go through, produce as or more detailed metrics, but then start to be able to capture them within our own data lake so we could start to be able to do analytics at scale on it. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, we'll go next slide real fast. So for us, the other thing that was advantageous about OTEL, so in a Capital One development environment, we give our developers a tremendous amount of flexibility. That's flexibility within the languages they use, libraries they use, and their architectures to be able to meet their individual use cases. That's wonderful for us to be able to make sure that we are able to get products that work to our customers very, very quickly. But from now trying to be able to come up with a common telemetry solution on the back end that allows us to be able to get all the insights that we need to be successful a little bit harder. That's where OTEL, the flexibility to be able to handle all the different languages and architectures, not just from a metrics perspective, but also from a tracing and logging perspective, gave us that muscle memory right there. So I'll walk you through a use case just real fast. If you don't mind, we'll go to the next one. So just an example, so okay, so I'm not going generic. We had a Spark architecture. I want to be able to say they were on a like R5 2XL, had a fleet of them. And all of a sudden, CPU utilization went super high. So they came back and said, no, we need to double the architecture size. So we need to all go to 4XLs, redeployed it. Shortly thereafter, all of a sudden, CPU utilization topping out again. So, oh no, we need to now go to the 8XLs. So whoa, okay. let's take a look at what's going on there. Well, sure enough, their CPU utilization was extraordinarily high, but their memory utilization was low, disk utilization was super low. So okay, let's now, so with OTEL, we're able to start to be able to see, okay, so from the CPU itself, like what exactly is it doing? So we took a look at all the CPUs. So like the actual CPU used state was really low, but the IO weight was huge. So basically what it's telling us, yes, their CPU utilization is super high, but it's the CPU just spinning and waiting and waiting and waiting. Now, the cool part for us now, with the OTEL metrics, we actually have tremendous logging. So you're starting to be able to say, okay, what process in there is actually causing that CPU to be able to sit there and spin for so long? We found it was trying to be able to go through and write logging to a external application that wasn't responding. So instead of continuing to be able to go through and increase the size of our instances in perpetuity, because some external source wasn't like responding to it, we were able to stop the madness right there and get it fixed. So those are the types of moving up the stack type of insights that we were talking about. The other piece, so if you take that same thing in context, so we dump all of our OTEL metrics into our data lake. So we say, okay, it's cool that we found it on that one application. But now, because I can actually run analytics at scale, say, where else in our infrastructure is that happening? So you can start to be able to take these insights and scale them across the entire infrastructure. So just an example. Mike, I'll turn it back to you real fast.
And I think the really interesting thing that we kind of learned as we went through this OTEL process is a lot of times you think about FinOps as its own thing, and you think about observability as its own domain, right? We began to realize that there is no such thing as observability for FinOps or observability. They're one and the same, right? Any observability into your data gives you a good picture of what things are doing, right? One of the interesting things that we can kind of tie back in here is now that we are using FOCUS and that we're able to ingest our cloud data really well, no, we would not have been able to solve this use case purely using FOCUS, but it was really easy for us to actually understand the cost impacts and give credit to the people who were able to make that optimization, right? We've learned in this journey of FinOps that it's really important to save money, yes. It's really important to become more efficient, yes. But it's also really important to be able to kind of have traceability into what's going on and to also give the credit back to the teams that are doing those optimizations, right? It's not a negative that they are necessarily doubling their size. They're attempting to do what they need for their application, right? FinOps is really around trying to promote the good behavior, learn from it, and really put us back on the track of positivity in terms of savings rather than negativity in terms of any lost value. One of the things that led us to do also is really talk about governance, which is everyone's favorite topic, right? If we could set a policy that could stop people from doing bad spending things, that'd be awesome. We also would drive zero business value in our cloud, right? If we turned everything off, we'd save all the money, wouldn't get anything out of it, right? Capital One has invested heavily in a project called Cloud Custodian. It came through the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Cloud Custodian really is a cloud management, cloud governance tool, right? It allows you to do actions on your cloud based on policies, which is awesome. It allows us to do things such as filtering, tagging, actions, and it allows us to do it in any major cloud, right? What we do at Capital One with Cloud Custodian is really understand how we can scale ourselves. We could have individual developers checking our cloud every single day for the things that Brent mentioned. We would probably lose all value of that based on how many developers we'd have to hire and how much data they'd have to look through. Tools like Custodian really enable us to take individual actions and turn them into something, either highly replicatable, highly scalable, or turn them into something that potentially shifts them earlier in the stack. One of the things that we began to notice as we deployed more resources to the cloud is that we learned a lot of things later on that we wish we could have been proactive about. It's really easy in FinOps to be reactive, where you can stop cost after it's already happened, sure, but it's even better to be proactive to see what you can do to potentially prevent that leak from happening in the first place. And Cloud Custodian is a tool that allows us to kind of shift left on those and almost create a policy-based approach, where we can not only have cost policies as people that say, thou shalt not do these things, but we can turn them into code where we can start running against our own repositories, we can start running against our own environment and making those changes directly. An example of this is really around off hours, right? So one of the things that we noticed as a bank, we generally have pretty known usage patterns of when people are using their bank, right? We know that as we get many more transactions, it has a cyclical pattern throughout the day. This is really good because it means that we can obviously make sure resources are there so that when you need your bank is available. It also means that if we turn things on 24/7, we're probably not scaled correctly. We're probably losing some amount of value because we're over-provisioned. It's not often that people are using mass flux of checking their banking in the middle of the night. Hopefully it's available when they need it, but we don't really need to be 100% scaled up during that time. One of the things that we started to realize through this governance is trying to understand where we could potentially save that money without leveraging anything bad happening to our applications. And what that led us to was a concept called off hours, which is natively built into Cloud Custodian. So off hours in Cloud Custodian allows us to look at resources and strategically turn them on and off based off of a usage pattern or based off of metrics from those applications. In the use case here, what we're able to do is use OTEL data to basically funnel into a metric store. We can check against that data to see, hey, has this application run within the last time frame that we need it to? If not, let's turn it off, right? Where if we can see that we only need a compute application on between 9 and 5, if it's on at 5:01, let's turn it off because we may not need it on anymore. And by turning that off, yes, it still runs for 9 hours during the day, but we're saving those other hours of the day to basically get some compute costs back. One of the easiest things that we can do with this is start to look at it at individual applications, individual divisions, and then really build up from there. Cloud Custodian lets you do it in a distributed way where you can have the policies hit specific accounts on whatever provider you're using, specific applications, even specific tags of a cluster that you want to hit with the potential actions, right? So we can be super granular when we started to roll these out, which meant that we can start small with this. We can make sure that we're not going to shut down all of banking overnight, but we start with an application that we know we don't need. Cool. We'll turn it off, we'll see what the results are, then we can start scaling that to other applications, scaling it to other divisions. It allowed us to be really incremental and really intentional with what we're doing in our cloud. It also allows us to stop doing wasteful things, right? Because by turning those resources off, we also realize what else may still be on, right? In the example that Brent mentioned, hey, we realized that if we turn off the majority of our compute post hours, right? We turn it all off at 5 p.m. We probably don't need our logging platforms to be running at full efficiency. We don't need them to be running at 200% capacity if we don't have anything up with them, right? We get to see some of these downstream implications, and that's where FOCUS really comes into play again, is that we can start to see what happens downstream from making some of these off hours changes. The second we turn off compute, it's really easy to then analyze our service costs, and we can say, hey, compute costs went down. Perfect, that's what we wanted. Oh, our observability costs are still super high. Our networking costs are still super high. Our security costs are still super high, but we don't have things deployed there. It lets us then walk to that next step of, cool, let's check the data. Let's go back to the metric store. Let's figure out what else we might want to include. And specifically within Custodian, you can impact one resource at a time, a whole stack of things at a time. It really let us pick what we wanted to and kind of work through that way. So really what we started to learn in this journey of the open source tooling is that it's not just one tool in isolation. We kind of began to walk from tool to tool to tool. And as we kind of gained a new tool in our arsenal, we realized that it has many more applications across what else we were doing. And the other piece we learned is that every single tool can be used in whatever way you want it to be used in, right? Cloud Custodian is meant to be a governance tool. We're using it for FinOps purposes, which is definitely not what it was designed for, but it works great for us, right? We're able to see that OTEL was definitely not designed for our compute use cases of saving money, right? It was designed for observability, but as we start to use it for a FinOps tool, we start to realize that a whole bunch of use cases get unlocked for us, and that really helped resonate our open source program and kind of why we invest in these programs.
So I guess just kind of wrapping up here real fast, and I think these links are going to be available. These are the three that we talked about today. So we, I guess, probably read off the board, but FOCUS, OTEL, Cloud Custodian. So if you need to be able to access those, links here. And
yeah, again, the main thing that we learned with these is that it is not scary to contribute to open source. The main thing that we have learned is that it's easy to become a user and then give back to the community, right? It's not just your duty to do it, but you realize that, oh, there might be a new feature you want. Oh, hey, let's not rely on somebody else to contribute that feature. It's easy for you to then go contribute those features yourself, right? And I think that cycle is kind of how Capital One has approached a lot of these open source projects, where it's really around, number one, identifying where you could potentially use open source instead of using something vendor built, which saves you some money, which helps your FinOps practice. Number two, it's started to implement those tools and just try them out for those smaller use cases, be able to integrate them into your day-to-day pipelines, integrate them into your practices. And then number three, it's giving back and it's actioning on what you've learned, giving back to those features, supporting them, coming to conferences like this and sharing out the stories of what we learned with them, where I have not directly contributed to any of these projects, but hopefully sharing about them, it's half the contribution and getting people awareness of it. But it really is then repeating that cycle. So hopefully through this presentation, you've at least learned one thing more about FOCUS. I know it's talked about a lot, but realize that a lot of these open source tools are not specific to any domain. They can really help your FinOps practice. And also, they're good tools to be able to start playing around with, and they have that low bar of entry to be able to potentially get you high results. So with that, I know we definitely have a good amount of time, so we will open it up if anyone has Q&A, or if not, I know that it is 5:12 p.m., almost dinner time. We'll not hold anyone hostage, but do appreciate you all coming out and listening to us talk about FinOps. Yeah, you can set it to whatever you need to. So you can basically set your time zones with it. So for ours, we operate primarily out of the US. So we have ours set to a specific time zone in Eastern, but it can operate off of UTC. You can set it basically however you want. It's really cool because it's done through tagging. So if you want to update it at any time, you can, because you can just say tag, off hours 9 to 5, off hours 5 to 9, off hours whenever, and then you can have it apply based on certain criteria. So it's almost like a rules-based criteria of like an if this and this and this, then it applies. So it makes sure that, yes, you can have it applied to anything, but you can also make sure it applies to the correct thing instead of accidentally turning off a region by mistake. It's a learning curve a little bit of how the policies work, but it's very easy, and it is something you can play with locally. So it's a very test-driven approach to how you can run the policies, where specifically we will design a policy, be able to run it against specific accounts, be able to run it against your local, and then you can deploy it through and send it through your full CI/CD process. Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it's one that I will pull Brent in because it's a lot of fun. But we realized that within Capital One, we had a lot of specific divisions that were doing whatever it was they're doing, right? So we realized that each division actually had their own off hours, right? Each division may have had their own policy for deleting idle resources for specific resources. As a centralized team, we were able to realize that instead of having 9 people do the same thing in 9 different places, we could centralize them and actually own the centralized cost policy aspect of it while leaving the governance policies to each division. So basically, it let us now be the owners of anything that's related to deleting things purely for cost, where we actually operate on an inner sourcing model where we didn't write any of the policies ourselves. We just kind of maintain them and help take the collaboration from outside divisions. We help take our internal stakeholders and make sure that they are adequately represented with any changes, and we kind of maintain the cost piece, while each division, our cyber friends, our compliance friends, they can maintain their own policies separately. But it is all thanks to the fact that we have a really great internal cloud custodian team that enables us to be able to scale it that way. But the other interesting piece of it that I'll bring Brent in on this is it wasn't an easy process to get people to agree to that. Brent was actually our DE lead to kind of help convince people that there was value in centralizing. So Brent, I'll let you talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, so a lot of that piece was just kind of a slog to be able to come up with a universal like standard and then start to be able to come up with individual cost controls, make sure that everybody feels like they're properly included, socialized, to be able to gain alignment. I think the big value proposition for us was when we started to be able to show the individual divisions like the deltas between the different ways that they're running it to be able to come up with a common set of best practices. So.
Plus, it didn't hurt that we could show dollar signs ahead of time.
Yes, that always helps sell the business case.
Nobody's going to say no to free money, but it was, non-zero factor.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, again, I'll kind of reiterate some of it and let Brent too, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that it is baby steps, right? Like even doing the centralized cost policies is inner sourcing within the company. It wasn't an easy process to get people on board with, but we've done it once. We've done it a million times since then. It's kind of just learning that those are the things we wanted to do and making it align with our strategic priorities of, hey, yes, we want to save money. That is our North Star. Whatever gets us there, but making sure that we do it in a sustainable way that enables other pieces really helps us out. And the fact that we do rely heavily on the FinOps Foundation where we can meet other practitioners who deal with the same issue. It's funny enough, I've had someone ask me that at a FinOps meetup before around cloud custodian for cost, right? It's not necessarily a published use case, but it's good to be able to have those external contributions, start getting other people involved with it, and then it doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't hurt that we have a huge open source program office that we get to take advantage of, but starting grassroots really does begin with just the passion for what you're working on. And I know, Brent, if you have any thoughts to that as well.
I think you covered it. No, you covered it. So I don't know if he's planted or not. Yeah. But pardon the pun. No, so we have done a tremendous amount of work over the past year, and a lot of this is internally focused on our own development teams because we know that like cost resonates to a degree with certain developers, not all of them. So where cost may not resonate, like does trying to be able to do the right thing from a sustainability perspective, does that resonate? So we've gone back through and started to be able to socialize in amongst like our partners at AWS, Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, et cetera, to make sure that they're in alignment with how we're doing the calculations, but actually taking a look at the wattage draw for each instance based on the thresholds that it's being run at to be able to determine how much wattage was consumed for this period of time. We're then able to do the wattage to carbon conversions, and then we're able to do the carbon to, we call it our Capital One forest, like how many trees would need to be planted to be offset like our carbon production for this given month. But so yeah, no, this is exactly where we're trying to be able to go, and it's once again internally focused, just to be able to encourage a different segment within Capital One to be able to do the right thing. If you won't do it for financial reasons, would you do it for sustainability reasons?
It's a lot of fun too, right? Like it's a good process of the fact that like the data centers that the cloud uses are still data centers somewhere, right? You can look at your cloud region, you're like, oh, that's in Northern Virginia. You're like, oh, I'll never see it until you drive past it, and it's really hard to miss. It's a pretty big footprint, right? So one of the interesting things is like we have internal applications that show you cost, so really focusing on what else we can show you, what other dashboards we can show you, and a lot of those come from the same data sources, right? Where we're not adding in any new data sources, we're not doing anything differently. We're just telling you the same message in a different way, and then also promoted the campaigns with it, right? There's a whole field of everything is something ops, but right, green ops, it's a whole field, right? So trying to understand how we can also get involved in those sort of campaigns and realize that we were not the only company looking at that sort of aspect is really interesting. And it's really cool because it lets us kind of share those ideas and, link up with the folks that are very passionate about sustainability and kind of make sure that we're all driving the same message around, efficiency in the cloud as not just a cost metric.
So and I'm going to look for you to weigh in on this also. I'll say like with respect maybe more towards like the OTEL data. Like right now we're still trying to be able to figure out like what is, we'll say, the right level of granularity. Because if you're familiar with it, you can capture a tremendous amount of data through OTEL. But do you need all of it? So we're taking a look at usage patterns, access patterns to be able to figure out like what's the right level of depth for us to be able to get. Because to your point, like there is a tremendous storage cost on it. And then also making sure that when we have it, we have the proper retention period set around it. We have the proper archive period set around it, just so we're not storing it like in a frequent access tier in perpetuity.
Yeah, again, when it comes to things like Focus, yes, we are double storing data because we're using the Focus exports along with our previous exports. We did not switch over overnight cold turkey. Would have been a hard one, right? But I think the main piece that we realized, kind of like what Brent was alluding to, is we understand that there's a runway for some of these things of when you're using too much data, when you're doing some of these things, and it's kind of understanding that as much as there is an appetite to continue R&D, you have to kind of keep that appetite for the fact that R&D is not always free. So it's just understanding that we want to do it in a very intentional way. And we're not just turning on data to turn on data, but we're kind of always reevaluating, hey, is this the point where we turn off data? Is this the point where we store that data differently? And just kind of being able to be almost a little bit, introspective and look at what value we're getting out of it, and making sure that as a FinOps team, we also operate efficiently, right? Like wouldn't be a good thing if our FinOps team was burning money, right? The idea is that we want to be looking at us the same way we would look at another application, and as long as we're driving value and as long as we're doing those things, we're moving in the right direction, but we just have to be intentional about it, kind of keep doing those check-ins and really make sure that when we move to that next phase, we make sure that we are fully ready, fully capable, and then kind of move forward. But good question.
Yeah, and just one more real quick add on it. The one thing that gives us a little bit more flexibility is the fact that a lot of our data pipelines have automatic conversion over to like a Parquet format, which is going to be far more efficient, automatic compression. So it does give us a little bit of additional flexibility to make sure that we're making the right look at the data.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.